That was rather dramatic, but we are a battleground state. And welcome to our election wrap-up show. I'm reporter Richard Rellis, and typically we would have been in the newsroom. Last night newsroom would have been buzzing. If there's nothing like the atmosphere in a newsroom on election night, and this morning we would have come in a little bleary-eyed and tired, and we would have compared notes and tried to figure out what happened. And that's kind of what I'm going to do virtually with my colleagues, a bunch of them today, who covered various races up and down the ballot. And so hopefully you'll find it insightful to join me in talking to my colleagues about what happened, why it happened, and where we go from here. This isn't opinions. These are insights done by people who've lived and breathed these races for the last few months. So we're going to go up and down the ballot. There's been some fascinating races down at the local level, state legislators, county. We have, and then obviously the congressional races, and at the top, the president. So hopefully you'll enjoy visiting with my colleagues as we break down what happened with the election. Let's look at the map of the nation as it stands now. It looks, I've just been informed in my ear, my wife just told me CNN has just called Wisconsin for Biden. So this is where it stands now. At least this is the map that the Republic has: 238 for Biden, 214 for Trump, and a lot of states still in play. Fox News has called Arizona for Biden, but as we'll talk, there's still a lot of votes out there to be counted. Let's start with just how voting went. Let's start with the basics of how people did vote, were able to vote. Reporter Brianna Frank covers breaking news, covers mayhem, typically public safety, and has sort of kept an eye on what happened. Brianna, good to see you again. Welcome. And what happened? How did voting go across the state, across the county?
Yeah, so voting overall yesterday went pretty smoothly. There were some reports of longer lines, but of course, that's sort of to be expected. Everything was going pretty smoothly until last night. There was a report. Two siblings were claiming that they were kicked out of a polling place without casting their ballot. They claimed that they were in line by 7 p.m. Law enforcement ended up showing up. They were told that they arrived too late, and so they could not vote. Law enforcement eventually got involved. The siblings claimed that MCSO, the sheriff's office, threatened to arrest them. And finally, after about an hour of back and forth, the siblings left at the request of law enforcement without casting their ballot. So I've been checking with Election Protection Arizona, which responded to that scene last night and, asked if they are pursuing legal action, what they are doing about this incident. We haven't heard back, but we're obviously following that very closely. But other than that, things seemed to go pretty smoothly yesterday. There weren't widespread reports of rallies or protests or major problems at the polls, which is, obviously a good thing for voters in the state.
Yeah, I think they were bracing. I mean, there were some chatter. I think the way the Southern Poverty Law Center put it was people discussing, possible violent fantasies, mm-hmm. People talking about needing to, go guard the polls with, watching for any improprieties. And I think we were kind of looking for that, bracing for that, but there was really no reports of incidents, maybe a spot here or there, right?
Sure. Yeah, I know, for example, at Surprise City Hall, there was an incident where someone was driving a truck and had a sign that some perceived to be voter intimidation. But I don't believe, at least from what I've seen, anything ever came of that incident. So like you said, Richard, some small pockets of rumors on Twitter of small things happening here or there. But in general, things went pretty smoothly yesterday.
Yeah, and I guess, we think back to the presidential preference primaries or presidential preference elections of 2016, where people were waiting in lines for hours. And again, it just seemed like people were wary about it. We obviously were on the watch for it. Nothing happened. I guess the strangest thing that happened election-wise, and we'll talk with Lauren Castle, our justice reporter, later in the show, is the county attorney being rushed to the hospital. And then this morning there was incidents of people talking about Sharpie Gate, and when Jen Fifield comes on, we'll talk about those as well. But yeah, so far it looks like the mayhem level of this election was pretty low.
Yes, and some of that could be because so much is still so unclear at this point. I mean, we're certainly keeping our eyes peeled for any reports of any rallies or protests scheduled after. For example, we know for sure who the president is going to be, but as of right now, it feels pretty calm. People are in general, I think, just trying to wait and see how the dust settles and then sort of go from there in terms of planning any rallies or demonstrations in regards to the election.
Excellent. I know you'll keep tabs on it, as well as our breaking news or daily focus team. And everyone should watch AZ Central if there's developments. Hopefully things stay calm. Thanks for joining us, Brianna.
Hopefully. Thank you, Richard.
So let's start at the top of the ticket and look at that was met with some backlash right away, and there's still some questions about whether that call was right. So let's bring in our national political reporter, Ron Hansen and Yvonne Winget Sanchez, who hopefully got a little sleep between last night and this morning. Not much. Okay. Let's start with the president. What are you folks hearing from the campaigns? How much of a surprise was this result?
Well, from Joe Biden's campaign's perspective here in Arizona, we are exactly where they predicted we would be. Obviously not all the ballots are counted, but they were predicting, somewhere between a 1.5 to 3, maybe 4% margin over President Trump. And they were feeling very confident in the days leading up to the election, and certainly they are feeling more confident today. When it comes to President Trump's campaign here in Arizona, they still think that there's some ground that they can make up that might put them within striking distance, perhaps, of launching a legal battle, mounting a legal battle. They've had an army of attorneys set up here in Arizona preparing for legal fights for some time now. And I think that that's probably where this thing is heading, if it's, within maybe a 1 to 1.5, even 2% margin. So I would expect to continue to hear optimism from the Trump campaign for a number of days, and we'll see how this thing ends.
Is this what we expected in Maricopa County? And even like looking at the precincts or the neighborhoods that went blue, like what changed between 16 and 20? We've heard a lot about suburban women. Is that what made the difference in Maricopa County?
It wouldn't be surprising if that were the case. One thing that we do know, based on the precinct map to this point, noting that these are all very unofficial records at this point, unofficial results, is that the map looks a lot like what we saw in 2018 in some ways for Democrats, even more so in some ways, that they did well basically inside the Loop 101 in the Phoenix area. The Democrats did really, really well. That's what they had hoped to have. And you can presume from that they did well with Latinos, for example. We know that there's been a longstanding gender gap anyway across the country. We presume that has also been the case here in Arizona. Those are the kinds of factors that have helped push Democrats to a point where they can compete. And in Maricopa County, they are really sort of showing quite unusual strength in a number of different down ballot races as well.
And Yvonne, are there enough rural voters? Or it seemed like the Republicans, the Trump campaign was going hunting for votes in rural Arizona. Are there enough there, or is that good hunting ground?
It's certainly good hunting ground for conservative voters. And we saw President Trump, we saw Senator McSally, who's a Republican, who was appointed to the late Senator John McCain's former seat, really spend a lot of time in the outskirts of Maricopa County and Pima County. For them, their biggest ground game was in rural Arizona. They needed to not just register new Republican voters, but to really shore up the people who voted for them in 2016. The Associated Press has called this race. Even though they've called it, Trump and his campaign remain optimistic that perhaps they can make up some ground with some of these Republican voters who dropped their early ballots off, maybe day of. And, I think it's going to be a really tricky, mathematically, almost impossible path for them to make up that ground. Nonetheless, they continue to strike a tone of optimism.
Yeah, the governor sent out a tweet after the race was called by the AP, and it sounded like on Fox last night they were hearing from GOP folks here. I don't know if either of you were getting the same sort of signals on background from party folks saying this is too early. How freaked out were people in the state Republican Party?
Yeah, they weren't happy with Fox calling this thing. And I think the governor's campaign data team has been in touch with the president's team, and they're continuing to ask for patience. They're asking for all the votes to be counted. I just don't know that it will make much of a difference at the end of the day on these statewide races. Certainly when it comes to the legislative races and perhaps some of these local races, it will make a difference. But in a race like the presidency that it appears as though was not won or lost on the margins, I don't know how you make up that sort of ground.
And again, overall, the way the state is going, besides you two co-hosting the Gaggle podcast, this year you produced a podcast that looked back at the history of SB 1070 and kind of spun it forward into how it would affect the race. We don't obviously have numbers so far on how Latino vote was, but just looking at what the results we've had so far, do you think the thesis of your podcast bore out that Latinos turned out and might have made a difference in how Arizona voted?
Well, I can tell you, I talked to Representative Ruben Gallego earlier today, and he is confident that Joe Biden will hold on to this state because of that very reason, that the strength of the Latino vote in his district, in Raul Grijalva's district, and in other pockets across the state may have been the crucial differences how they look at it. So this is something that we don't know for sure, but any time that there's a really close race, every last vote matters. And that was, as much as anything, sort of that thesis is that, Democrats had this pocket of voters that were likely to break for them in significant numbers that continue to come into the political establishment and vote.
And just to add to that, in terms of the thesis, we tackled that 5-part series for a reason. The Latino vote and the Democratic enthusiasm more broadly that came as a result of Senate Bill 1070, which at the time was the harshest immigration law in the country, energized Latinos and community organizations in a way that should not be underestimated. There is a reason that some of these groups like Lucha have seen so much success here in a state like Arizona. They invested in the community in a sustained way. They kept talking to Latino voters in English, in Spanish. They were reaching them and connecting with them in neighborhoods, in grocery stores, in schools, outside of schools, in a way that really kept the enthusiasm and kept the conversation about what was going to be at stake in this election in a way that, some of these other maybe more political groups, the political action committees, just did not. When you see community organizations like this invest, stay, continue the conversation, we start to see investment by the people that they are talking to. And I think when the exit polls come and the races are called, that will be one of the major storylines of this election.
Rediscovering SB 1070 available on Apple iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. Going to the McSally-Kelly race. Again, I mean, the polls told us to expect this result. It still feels like a surprise that Arizona is represented by 2 Democratic senators. What are you hearing from both camps here?
Mark Kelly's campaign is obviously very optimistic. The race was called for them. I don't think that we will hear much from him beyond his election night speech.
Actually, let's listen to what he said to voters last night. We have a bit of what he said.
I am very humbled to be here, and I'm also confident that when the votes are counted, that we're going to be successful in this mission. Now, this doesn't feel like a typical election night. And this hasn't been a typical year. And that's why tonight, it's not about celebrating. Tonight is about getting to work.
Yeah, so that's, I mean, we're used to seeing him in a black T-shirt. He's now in the coat, not quite the tie yet, but yeah, but that's kind of, he's going to kind of stay off that election night speech, Yvonne. We're not going to hear much more from him until Inauguration Day, you don't think?
Oh, we'll hear from him before Inauguration Day, and AZ Central better get that interview. We will be talking to him. We have not heard anything from Martha McSally, but what we know what's happening behind the scenes is Mark Kelly's team has moved into the transition phase of this campaign. They are going to start staffing up to try to get a sense of what this office looks like. We have a story about that posted this morning on azcentral.com. Expect him to tap into the pretty tight-knit network that he and his wife, Gabby Giffords, who represented the Tucson area in Congress for a number of years, expect them to tap into that network of people who are well-known political hands here in Arizona. They're well-known on Capitol Hill. They will be able to kind of get this office up and going very quickly. An expert that I spoke to, who is a Senate historian, essentially said Martha McSally's office will be packed up. Mark Kelly will be moving in very quickly, and he could be sworn in and seated as early as November 30th, which is when Arizona is expected to certify its election results.
Right, because Yvonne, that's a story you had a few weeks ago during what we thought was going to be a prolonged, possibly until late November, Supreme Court fight to get Amy Coney Barrett confirmed, that Mark Kelly would take his seat early because of the special circumstances of this election. But yeah, it does move swift. Where does Martha McSally go from here, if anywhere? I mean, her place in Arizona politics is rather unique.
Yeah, so she's a Rhode Island native. She's lived here in Arizona for a number of years. This is her second consecutive Senate loss. I don't know where she goes from here. I can't imagine that she would run again for office. I read her memoir, Dare to Fly, and in it, towards the back, she talks a little bit about imagining what life might look like in a post-political world for her. And I think in that book, if I recall correctly, she kind of imagined what it might look like to, go run a company or go be involved in a nonprofit. There's also a speculation that perhaps she goes to represent a defense company back on Capitol Hill. I mean, she is a very talented woman. She has a very compelling biography, and I don't think it's the last that we've seen of Martha McSally.
Yeah, and Ron, you said you talked to Ruben Gallego earlier today. I mean, how much does Mark Kelly have to thank Ruben Gallego, who had discussed running in the Democratic primary against Mark Kelly? How would that have changed maybe the contours of this race?
It's a great what if. It's hard to say with any confidence how it would have turned out. It looked like Mark Kelly had just such a sizable fundraising advantage right out of the gate in that race. And there were a lot of people eager to coalesce around him, even if Rubin had gotten in that race. But primaries have a way of sort of tearing into your eventual nominee in some way. It's even if it's death by 1,000 paper cuts. I think that Mark Kelly is grateful that he did not have to go through a bruising Democratic primary. And Ruben Gallego, was very helpful in making sure across the state, especially for the Biden campaign, but yes, also for Mark Kelly, in sort of making the case that people of color, they need to turn out, they need to vote for the Democratic ticket, that there really was no concern that people had the luxury of not voting for him if they were otherwise Democrats in this race. And I think that Ruben Gallego sort of stepped up in a pretty significant way throughout this cycle, helpful to Mark Kelly behind the scenes and also for Joe Biden's campaign.
Yeah, Mr. Kelly will go to Washington. Did you have a thought on Ruben, Yvonne? If not, we'll stay with Ron to talk about congressional races. We'll let you get at least a few minutes of sleep or rest. Thank you for joining us, Yvonne.
Thanks so much.
And Ron, let's go quickly through the congressional races. There might have been some drama, at least in one. Tell us about how David Schweikert and Harel Tiperneny. We've learned how to pronounce her name, and now that she's run for Congress twice, how is she doing, and what do you see coming out of this?
Yeah, so this is our most compelling House race, and it's one that a lot of people have been looking at for some time now. David Schweikert, of course, had the ethics investigation that culminated this summer with a finding of 11 violations and a $50,000 fine from the House. This thing has sort of hung over David's campaign and really affected his ability to raise money and compete in what is historically Republican territory. Republicans still had a 12 percentage point registration advantage in his district heading into this election. And on election day, of course, with the people who actually show up, that advantage is probably a little bit higher. Harel Tiperneny has shown herself to be a very able campaigner, but also was somewhat hampered, I think, by the pandemic. It's something that, yes, she is a doctor, and it's a pandemic that sort of plays to what is her career strength in some ways, but it also kept her off the trail in a more vigorous way that may have been crucial in this race. We thought this was a toss-up heading into the election. It still looks that way. Her margin is pretty narrow. There's at least 50,000 extra votes to be counted. The votes that remain have been trending Republican. So this one is close, and it's, it still could go to David Schweikert in the end. And
right,
this, by the way,
she ran for Congress before. It was on the other side of town. So these voters in this district may have seen her television ads, but didn't really get to know her as a candidate in their district, right?
Yeah, so she ran in the 8th district, that's Debbie Lesko's district, twice in 2018, once for the special election and then again in the general election. She came very close in the election in April of 2018. She came within 5 percentage points in a district that is Republican by more than 17 points in that special election. But in the general election, when there was much higher turnout more broadly, she lost by 11 points. So the fundamentals of the district really kind of came back and pulled her under in that race in a way that is interesting as we look at this race. Will the fundamentals of the 6th district that's based in Scottsdale, will that be enough to pull David Schweikert through?
Yeah. And this, as you say, is the closest race we have. The other one that people thought, or I guess handicappers thought might have been closer, was Tom O'Halloran's race against Tiffany Shedd. But that also doesn't, I mean, how do you see that becoming a tightening race?
Yeah, I do. I think that this race is not over. This is one of the most interesting districts in Arizona, just as political spectacle, because it's a district that cuts across 11 different counties in Arizona. There's only 15 counties. So This district is a jigsaw of a lot of different little constituencies across the state. And Tom O'Halloran has, at last look for me, done reasonably well at sort of preserving the kind of coalition of voters that he has used in 2018 and in 2016 to win this district as a moderate Democrat. But Tiffany Shedd is still in there. There is still a path that her folks, I think, are still at least optimistic that they can make this race much closer. And especially if Donald Trump is to find a lot of extra votes as the final votes are counted, this would probably help Tiffany Shedd's prospects as well, because much of that district is in conservative-leaning, Republican-leaning parts of the state. So that race will probably get even tighter. The only suspense is whether it's enough to actually tip over the other way.
Yeah, and the other races, I mean, did anyone else make a go of it or a showing that surprised you at all?
You know, this is where we'll need those final numbers to take a really good look, but there were no surprises. Incumbents won the other 7 House races. I don't think there were any surprises. Debbie Lesko has won by smaller than expected margins in the past in her 2 previous runs. I think that if you look at it, last night she looked like she was doing about as well as what you would expect in that district, maybe a little bit lower, but she was the one that might have underperformed, and that didn't really happen. If you look at the other districts, from Greg Stanton to Ann Kirkpatrick, what we see are pretty lopsided Democratic wins where we would expect to see them. And then in other districts across the state, such as Paul Gosar in Northwest Arizona, this is the Republican most district in the state. He won very handily. So no surprises across the board. What is important, though, is the margins there will be very useful in trying to understand how close the presidential race will turn out as well. It's not enough for Gosar to win in Northwest Arizona. He has to run up huge margins for Donald Trump to have a chance to win in the rural parts of the state.
And our delegation makeup, I guess it stays majority Democrat, no matter how the Schweikert-Tippernenny thing does. If Tippernenny does take that seat, what does that do to the makeup of the congressional race or the congressional delegation out of Arizona? Yeah,
so this could still change. These are both fluid races, but if Tippernenny were to win and if Tom O'Halloran hangs on, you would have a 6-3 Democratic majority in these 9 congressional districts. If the Republicans end up winning both of those races, which is possible, you would see Republicans reclaim the 5-4 majority that they had after the 2014 elections in Arizona.
Excellent, Ron. We'll look for those numbers. Thanks for joining us to discuss the congressional races. We're going to move into the Statehouse. Thank you, Ron, and talk with Andrew Oxford, who covers the state legislature for the Republic, to see, I mean, there was some talk that Democrats had ambitions of taking both chambers, and geez, the early drop of votes from the state, especially Maricopa County, seemed to indicate they had a chance, but overnight those numbers changed. And Andrew, good to see you. Where are we at now?
Hey, good to see you. Yeah, Democrats seem to have a number of options early in the night for getting to a majority in both the House and Senate. But right now, they're currently only leading in one Senate district that's held by a Republican, that's over in Paradise Valley, Christine Marsh, with a pretty comfortable lead over Kate Brophy-McGee that hasn't significantly narrowed overnight. And they're only leading, I think, in one Statehouse race that's over in the Peoria-Glendale area. Judy Schweikert is still very comfortable position there. Democrats are close in 2 other Statehouse races, I would say. You've got Coral Evans, the mayor of Flagstaff, is still not too far off, depending on what these next ballots that are counted show. And then you've also got Kathy Connect, also over there in the Northwest Valley, who had a good returns early on in the night, saw that lead fade away. So she's in a pretty close race with Kevin Payne right now. So there are some tight races out there, but at the moment, I don't see any clear majority for anybody at the moment.
So do you think, what will the numbers, where do the numbers stand? It seems like Senate might be, they might tie it up, or what happens if it is 15-15?
Well, then you'd have a tie, right? That happened in the early, just a couple decades ago, right? And by all accounts was kind of a mess. So it can happen. That's what we get for not having a lieutenant governor, right? If it's just split down the middle, it's split down the middle, and they got to figure out how to make it work. Democrats would need to pick up 3 seats to have an outright majority. So they're only leading in 1. They're close in maybe 2 others. Again, it's all going to come down to what this next batch of ballots from Maricopa County shows. So they would need 3 for an outright majority there. They would need to win 2 in the House for an outright majority there. And again, are leading or close in 3.
Okay. Yeah, and it looks like a lot of the Democrats running in the House seem to be single shots, right? They only put up 1 candidate to run against 2 Republicans. Did that strategy seem to, is that strategy working?
Yeah, I think that's going to be the big question with what we see coming out of the Northwest Valley in this next batch of ballots. I mean, the fact that you've got, Judy Schweikert and Kathy Knecht, who are both running as single shots, very competitive in the early results from what it looks like. That would, go to show that that's really paying off. Same thing with, I think the approach of really just trying to drill down on those districts. I mean, Democrats have been trying to focus on that Glendale, Peoria area by targeting also Paul Boyer, who has a fairly close lead over Doug Irvin in that district. And so that would be another Senate seat to watch. So yeah, I think that single shot strategy, as well as really spending a lot of money on these races. Democrats raised a lot of money and they used it to kind of throw a lot of things out there and create a lot of possibilities for where they might be able to win a majority. But I would note they are at risk of losing a seat in the House at the moment. Joel John is running out in District 4. This is a pretty sprawling district that goes from Yuma, goes to the West Valley, and it goes all the way down to Tucson. He's a former teacher, has an irrigation business, never run for office before. But when Republicans have put up House candidates there in the past, they can get pretty close. Right now, he's leading Geraldine Peaton for one of that district's 2 House seats. Again, that's going to be one to watch as we get more votes counted from Maricopa County. But at the moment, there's that in play as well.
Yeah, that single shot strategy might work in that district for the Republicans. And as you mentioned, there's still votes to count, both statewide and in the county. We're going to bring in Jen Fifield to talk about that. Andrew, thanks for joining us from the Capitol Press Room, or at least the Capitol Press Room in the Arizona League of Cities and Towns building across the street. But good to see you in the office. Jen Fifield covers Maricopa County and the city of Phoenix and has been sort of looking at the recorder's office and how the processing of ballots going. Jen, good to see you. Let's talk about the outstanding ballots that are out there. Is counting going smoothly?
It should be. That's what I've heard. That's what all indications say so far. So if you cast an in-person ballot yesterday, your ballot should be good and counted. What the county's still working on now, Richard, is counting those ballots that were dropped off yesterday, as well as any early votes that were cast before that. We don't have an exact count, but I'm thinking it's around 250,000.
Okay, yeah, and I guess this stuff gets complicated. But right, if a ballot was arrived at the Maricopa County Recorder's Office before a certain day, and I believe that day was Friday or Saturday, they have the opportunity to count those before Election Day. Sunday, Monday, they have to wait until after Election Day because of laws. And then there's people who drop off ballots at the polling place. And then there's these provisionals, people who, right? I guess quickly explain what a provisional ballot is, because there's still some of those out there as well, right?
Yeah, there's about 10,000 provisional ballots, and that's actually dramatically lower than it usually is because of our new voter check-in system that allows live time county to see who's registered to vote. So those provisional ballots are people that show up the polling place and for some reason their registration isn't there. They're not showing up on the check-in computers. And so they're casting a provisional ballot that then goes through an entire review process. Those early ballots still go through a review process, so I've gotten a few questions about that in the last day. They're being signature verified, but these provisional ballots even have a more in-depth process for how they get reviewed.
Okay, yeah, and I guess that's probably good news that there's not as many provisional ballots, because that means people were able to cast their ballot without question. There is a lingering controversy in Maricopa County, at least on social media, which, as we know, everything on social media is 100% true all the time. People are talking about Sharpies, the brand name for the black felt tip pen. What is going on with Sharpies?
Okay, well, this may have started, there may have been confusion because when you get your ballot, it says up top, vote in black or blue ink. And so then you get to a polling place and the person, the poll worker, hands you a Sharpie. And that caused a lot of confusion. Is my vote going to be counted if I use this Sharpie? Why are they trying to disenfranchise my vote? Really what it is the county just learned over time that these Sharpies dry the fastest. They're the most efficient for voting. And so if you need to put your ballot into the tabulator right away, it's going to be dry within seconds. So it's really actually the most efficient way to vote. And so the rumors going on around social media right now saying, that they're trying to disenfranchise you. I think there may have been a protest mentioned about this. Hopefully just getting information out to voters about how this is a completely safe way to vote with the Sharpie is going to help.
If you had voted in person and somehow you really rubbed the Sharpie in and it bled through, or something was wrong with your ballot, you were saying in sort of our internal newsroom chat that the machine would have kicked it out and let you know right away?
So I did poll worker training last summer, so I'm going to just talk a little bit about that. First, things have probably changed since last summer. They always do, and I haven't checked in with county officials about that. But what I remember from it is if there were any questionable fill-ins on your ballot, or if you forgot to fill in a section, there's going to be something that comes up that says something that notifies the poll worker. So you should know if everything's going well with your ballot. If it takes it, you should be good. But if there's any questions about whether your ballot was counted in person, you can go to beballotready.vote, and it'll tell you live time whether the county's processed the ballot, whether it's been counted, and that should solve a lot of your worries. Every ballot cast in person should be there. It should have been counted. So that's one way to quickly check.
Also, I know we can do that with early ballots. I didn't realize that with in-person ballots, you can also check. Okay, interesting. And I guess if there is a problem with your ballot, I mean, there's teams of observers who are checking to try to determine voter intent if something got messed up, mainly in mail-in ballots or drop-off ballots. And I guess they may contact you, right, if there's something that they need to cure on your ballot?
Yeah. So like I said, all early ballots at least go through a really significant bipartisan process with signature verification. There's requirements under state law for bipartisan review of any questionable ballots. And not to go into detail there, if you want to watch it yourself, you can go to maricopa.vote and watch all of the fun stuff happening when they're counting your ballots.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's there. When should we expect the next big batch of ballots out of Maricopa County that I guess a lot of people are waiting to see which way they go?
Yeah, no, I feel like across the state and actually even the nation, people are watching what happens in Maricopa County because it has turned into the swing county. And so 7 p.m. tonight, we've been told there's going to be a substantial drop. Like I said, I'm not sure how many ballots are outstanding, but the county can count about 100,000 ballots a day. So we should know in a few days. We should be good here. And the county's goal was to count everything by Tuesday. So by next time this week, we should know where we stand.
Okay, and we should have a decent idea today. I guess we'll know what this next batch shows, but also how many ballots are left. And I guess the other thing is it looks like Election Day voters in Maricopa County went more for Trump, but people who voted early went more for Biden. We have no idea what these ballots that were kind of in this middle period are. There's rampant speculation about it, but we'll know more at 7 o'clock tonight. The Maricopa County Board of Supervisors suddenly is majority Democratic. What happened, and how do you see this? I mean, how do you see this? Was this a surprise to you?
I wouldn't ever say that I'm surprised by election results. If you're paying attention and you know what's going on, as I'm sure Yvonne and Ron can tell you from being in politics for a long time, you kind of figure when something's amiss and when something might change and shift in the county that you're covering or the area you're covering. So I knew that Democrats had put up challengers to Republicans in seats held long by Republicans in the county. And I knew that those challengers had political experience in some cases. The candidates themselves told me that these races were going to be really tight. And so, there is a Democratic majority right now, which I checked in with the county Dems this morning to try to see if this was the first time in our history here. I don't know that for sure, but I know that these are long-held Republicans, and it's going to change the way that the county governs, specifically as we go into 2021 and address the mask mandate, COVID-19 response. If we see another big wave here, that could dramatically change the way that we're being tested, the way that we're protecting ourselves. And I think that's really what caused voters to come out and weigh in this election.
Yeah, it was a 4-1 board, but it also seemed like they kind of got along. I heard a few meetings where they discussed, sort of the go along, get along. We're all rowing the same way, even though one of us is a Democrat. It'll be interesting to see how these two newcomers blend in with Steve Gallardo forming a Democratic majority, right? How if it's smooth sailing at those Board of Supervisors meetings going forward.
It's definitely going to be interesting to watch, as it's going to be interesting to watch the entire state as we see more Democrats in office.
And briefly, while we have you, because you also cover the city of Phoenix, there was a mayoral race here too, and they put the mayoral race on the general election ballots, hoping it would draw in more voters. But it seemed to got lost in the shuffle a bit, right? But what happened with the Phoenix mayoral race?
It did get lost in the shuffle, but the Mayor Kate Gallego has declared victory. She was reelected, and we aren't calling that race because we don't really call races, but she has, and she's preparing for 4 years serving the city. I think really what happened with that is she was recently elected to the spot because after Mayor Greg Stanton resigned, there was an opening in 2018. So there was just a race, voters just picked her, and probably campaigns on the other side didn't have enough time to organize for this one. Although she did face a good challenger in the Republican on the ballot. It just looked like people's eyes were elsewhere this election.
Yeah, excellent. Jen, we'll we'll look for the ballot drop at 7 and keep seeing how these races go. Thanks for joining us, and everyone can follow your reporting on our new Board of Supervisors when they take their seats coming in the next year. Thanks for joining us. The other county race that really got national attention, we'll bring in Lauren Castle, who covers the justice system here in Maricopa County, to talk about the Maricopa County attorney's race, which, Lauren, John Legend weighed in on this race. Where do we stand, and what does this mean?
Yeah, so it is a tight race so far. Julie Gunnigal has a slight lead over Alistair Adele, the current county attorney. So basically the race so far has not moved since early this morning, since I was last up at 1:30 a.m. But so basically, we're just waiting to see how the rest of the votes decide this race. I think it's really interesting to see how voters are basically showing what's on their mind and letting us know what they think. This race, believe, is really important just because Maricopa County has been the reason for the most convictions of inmates that are currently in our state prisons. And our state is consistently in the top 10 for rates of mass incarceration in the country. We also received news about our current county attorney, Adele. She is currently hospitalized. She had emergency surgery for bleeding in the brain. So we're kind of
Yeah,
waiting to find out about that.
yeah. So that broke late last night, and again, like
Yeah.
all we know is she's in the hospital. The county has asked, like, don't bug us anymore, respect her privacy. So we really have no idea what caused the condition, or if it was, was it stress over the election? We have no idea what caused this, correct?
No, we have no idea. We talked to her campaign right before the first round of um, voting results were released, and they told us right before then that she was at home waiting for the results with her family. And so that's the last time we kind of heard from people before it was announced, kind of right before the second release of results, that she was taken to the hospital. And then earlier this morning, kind of around, I want to say right before 8 o'clock, that is when we found out that she had emergency surgery. So, other than that, we have no idea how her recovery is going on. However, that she is we do know that she's in stable but serious condition, and that her family is thanking the community for their prayers and thoughts.
Right, and she's still. I mean, I guess the office still runs. There's still cases going through. I'm trying to think. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, she's still the sitting county attorney, and for right now, as long as she's in the hospital, we wish her well. That she continues acting as that, and we'll find out where the results go. Uh, her challenger, Gunnigal, to get back to the race itself, really ran on this notion of social justice, or I guess putting on trial how trials are conducted or how prosecutions are conducted uh, in Maricopa County. And is that what made this race so contentious, b grabbed some national audience?
Well, I think also the current events that are going around across the country has made people more aware of the criminal justice system and more kind of more passionate of what's going on in their communities. So I think that's one of the reason why more people have been focused on this race. And Gunnigal's platform has really been about common sense justice reforms. She has talked to voters about, helping juveniles in the court system, focusing on marijuana and how that is being prosecuted in our state and in our county, as well as women's rights. She is a believer in the women's right to choose and protecting women's rights. So I think just all of her stances kind of is helping her reach out to voters and helping them kind of understand her views. The county attorney has really been focused on the duties of the office and helping victims, with what they're going through in the court process. And she made a bigger push, kind of I want to say going after Gunnigal in the past 3 months. She's really interested in helping the community understand that she is also um, really passionate about criminal justice reform and wanting to protect families and victims.
Boy, yeah, we'll watch for those results to drop in and see how this race goes, and look for your reporting on the direction of this office. I guess typically running with a D behind your name in Maricopa County would have been not a great thing politically, but this election looks like it is changed. We have a sheriff, Democratic sheriff, school superintendent. I think the assessor and treasurer are still Republican, but Democratic majority along the way. Lauren, thanks for joining us on this. If we can, if Andrew is still there, let's quickly wonder, depending on how the votes go, could Arizona, I know Yvonne and Ron talked about this a bit, about legal challenges. What are the laws here about a recount, or, how does this end up in the courts, Arizona's votes?
Yeah, I mean, so there are pretty specific laws about when to recount which races, right? And it's got to be pretty tight to trigger kind of automatic recount. It's, I think, pretty specific to the type of race you're running in, right? And actually, I had someone just send me the language on
Also,
this.
it's not like county versus. I mean, there's different rules whether you're running for president or mine inspector,
right. So
or
I'll
judge.
give you an example. So if it is a office to be filled by, if it's a race for legislature, for example, 50 votes, that's got to be, it's got to be within that. If there were, it's got to be about 200 votes in the case of an office to be filled by state electors, and for which the total number of votes cast is more than 25,000. So your sort of major statewide races, right? That's a pretty small margin to really want to launch a recount. I think, if there are legal challenges to be launched in different places, it'll often be around bits and pieces of the process of administering the election itself, which ballots to count, and how, basically, right? So I think that's where you'll really see a focus potentially in the courts if it comes to that point.
Right, because we had some polling places up in northern Arizona were ordered to stay open late. I don't know if they segregate those ballots, if there's a court challenge later, or if that's just adjudicated. But right, it sounds like if this gets close, there at least is some opportunity for one or more challengers, not just Trump's team, but right. I mean, you mentioned some of these state lawmakers races, legislative races that could end up in county court as well.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And, look, I think that the national campaigns have been clearly preparing for litigation in a number of different states, not just Arizona. But, you've seen bits and pieces of that, legal challenges popping up to the last minute in different battleground states, Pennsylvania, for example. So, I think the campaigns are definitely braced to that. I think the question is, what exactly are you going to challenge? Are you going to challenge particular types of ballots? Are you going to challenge ballots cast in a particular place? So we're yet to see.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. And as we know in Arizona, not just lawmakers make law, but the voters here can make law as well. We had two initiatives. Usually Arizona has a lot more initiatives on the ballot. This time there were just two. Let's bring in Ryan Randazzo, who has covered this initiative that would legalize recreational marijuana. And Ryan, it looks like it passed.
Yeah, the AP called it pretty early last night, and it's still maintaining about a 60-40 in favor of the yes vote on Proposition 207.
Is this the margin we expected?
I honestly was a little surprised. Obviously, the advocates were really trumpeting their polling that was showing wide margins of support, but a very similar measure 4 years ago failed, on narrow margins. So I thought this one would be a little bit closer, but there seems to be pretty broad support from both Republicans and Democrats for this.
And I guess one measure I've seen of how the attitudes about marijuana have changed is, I think years and years ago, anytime there was a story about legalizing marijuana, the lead and or the headline would feature a pot-related pun. We couldn't help ourselves. But it seems like since medical marijuana has been a thing. I mean, your coverage, you treat this like a serious business. We don't make pot jokes anymore in our stories about this massive industry.
Yeah, well, there's a ton of money at play here. You know, Arizona does more than $500 million worth of medical sales every year. The medical market here in Arizona has nearly tripled since the last time they tried to pass adult use. So not only do you have almost 300,000 people who have gone through the trouble and paid the money to get cards to access marijuana, but you have thousands of people working in this industry, and some of them with huge investments, in massive indoor farms and dispensaries and such. So there was a lot of support behind this.
Yeah, I mean, it really is a growth industry. Do we think, I mean, law enforcement was really heavy against this. And, there was a lot of talk about how it would change the way the state looks. I mean, looking at other states that have done this, what should we be looking for? Do you think this will cause wholesale changes in neighborhoods, a pot dispensary on every corner? I mean, it almost seems like the medical marijuana dispensaries now have the first line on opening up a recreational one, right? How prevalent will we see these shops?
Well, it's going to be mostly limited to the medical dispensaries that you see today. One issue, though, is that all of the dispensaries that are licensed in the state today haven't opened a shop yet. So there's about 120 dispensaries in Arizona. There's about 10 licenses out there that aren't used yet. So you're sure to see those open up a medical dispensary and then go to adult use. And then there's going to be 26 more licenses issued for the social equity program, where people from communities historically disadvantaged by marijuana laws will get first crack at those additional 26 licenses. So you could expect, in 2022 or thereabouts, that we'll probably have about 160 dispensaries statewide. That's a lot less than you see in California, Colorado, some of these other states that have many more dispensaries than that. And then we'll be capped at that, and it won't be able to increase until the total number of regular traditional dispensaries increases. That's how the medical licenses are doled out.
And while we have you, because you also cover the State Corporation Commission, the utilities, what is happening in that race? It looks like, again, a race that looked one way when the early results came in and dramatically changed overnight. Where do we sit?
Yeah, so the last I checked, we had 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat leading. Anna Tovar, mayor out in Tolleson, finishing up her term. She got the most votes so far. Early votes, again, trended Democratic. But incumbent Leah Marquez Peterson, who was appointed by Governor Ducey, seems to be earning her seat or winning her seat for a full term. And then Jim O'Connor, a Republican who had to get on the ballot through a write-in campaign, seems to be the person leading for that third spot. So it's a 6-way race for 3 seats, and it looks like it's going to be 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat if these results hold. This, to me, is a fascinating race. Eric Sloan, not winning, he got 3 viable Republicans kicked off the ballot by challenging their signatures, and then appears to fail to win a seat himself. So I don't expect that he's well regarded within his party right now, but it does look like 2 Republicans. The other noteworthy part on this race is that just last week, the Corporation Commission passed these sweeping new rules for renewable energy and clean energy in the state. If these results hold, it is unlikely those rules will be implemented. They need a final vote from the commission, and then they go through a rulemaking and they need the final approval there. Jim O'Connor does not believe in renewable energy standards, and Leah Marquez Peterson voted against this last week. And so the commissioners who approve those renewable energy standards, 2 of those Republicans aren't going to be there anymore. And it doesn't look like Arizona is going to have those rules if these are the commissioners that are sworn into office.
Fascinating, and another race we'll be watching closely when we get the new ballots in at 7. Ryan, thanks for joining us this afternoon. The other initiative on the ballot was Proposition 208, which essentially the Invest in Ed initiative, and Lily Altavina will be popping up on our screen here to talk about how this race went. Lily, this seems to have passed as well, right?
It does. It's in the lead, with more votes than Joe Biden has right now, or by more votes than Joe Biden has now. So it appears it's going to pass. Prop 208 proponents feel like it's going to pass. They actually held a press conference at 8:30 last night, and they said, we believe it's going to pass. And so far, that lead has held. So we'll see, what happens when more Maricopa County votes come in.
Do you, again, what the proponents were touting here and what you understand of how this goes, how soon before we see money flow to schools, and will this make a tangible benefit?
It's going to be a bit, because you pretty much need an entire year to implement this proposition, to start getting the revenue in. So teachers would start to see this in their paychecks by 2022 is the estimate. Will it make a measurable difference? People say yes. Education advocates have been saying for years that the magic number is around $1 billion for K-12 schools. Well, now this brings in an estimated $1 billion, about $1 billion, $827 million, according to the Joint Legislative Budget Committee. And so that will be a significant infusion of cash into educator salaries, and school nurse salaries, school counselor salaries. Will it be enough? That's kind of the eternal question. Will we hear less from educators asking for salary bumps? Will it stem the teacher shortage, which is, very dramatic right now in the pandemic? Those are all still questions not answered.
Right, because again, if it is not enough, would the legislature, and I guess now we're back to seeing what the makeup of the legislature is, have the appetite to increase just baseline education funding? But we talk about the Red for Ed movement and how dramatically, that movement seems to have made a huge difference, and sort of put to voters the question: how much are you willing to spend? How badly do you want to raise funding for education? How do you see the Red for Ed movement going from here?
Yeah, I've been talking to educators about this all morning. And, first of all, they're amazed. A lot of them stayed up until 3 a.m. last night. A lot of them were celebrating. I talked to Superintendent Kathy Hoffman just a couple of minutes ago. They're very happy to see Prop 208 in the lead. And they said, a lot of this is due to the work that they put in all the way going back to 2018. In the future, I think some of this does hinge on what the legislature does now. Hoffman has said, this is a message that we need more education funding, that voters care about education funding. No Red for Ed proponent has said, they're going to stop now. I think that you'll see a lot more organizing around causes like local school taxes, which, by the way, a lot of, local bonds and overrides in Maricopa County passed last night. Most did, with just, a few notable exceptions, like the Peoria school bond. Although Peoria did manage to pass its tax override, which it struggled for many years. So it seems like the trend that I've seen in the past couple of years is that voters are feeling more generous about their money towards schools. And you can't deny that Red for Ed really raised that profile. Teachers taking pictures of their crumbling classrooms and their textbooks falling apart, with George Bush as the current president. So all of that made a huge impact, and I don't think that organizing is going to stop. And they've had momentum now for 2 years.
True, and I know you've done those stories about how the School Facilities Board works. Education funding is incredibly complicated. I think universally, people from the governor on down have talked about the need to improve how it goes. So I know you'll be staying on education. Everyone can follow Lily's stories on AZ Central, obviously. But Lily, thanks for joining us on this election show. Let's take one last look at the national map to see if we have any changes. It looks like it's 248 to 214. Frankly, I forgot what it was when we started this show, but Biden's still in the lead electorally, according to the map on our website, AZ Central, 248 to 214. 7 o'clock, Maricopa puts out its latest batch of votes, which should give us a little more clarity on whether Biden indeed carries Arizona, and whether it changes any of the down ballot races, particularly the county attorney's race, where we have the sitting county attorney currently hospitalized, and we wish her well. And whether it changes the makeup in the legislature, as Andrew talked about. There's a lot of tight races that will be hinging on what these final, I believe we had a story this morning that said 400,000. I understand that number might have ballooned a bit. We'll check AZ Central. You can check AZ Central after we're done. Stay with us through tonight at 7 o'clock when we get the latest batch of results, and through the week. And as you see, we have reporters who have really deep knowledge of these races and can help us make sense of what happened. A state that increasingly is no longer reliably Republican, a state that has voted to raise taxes to fund education, to legalize recreational marijuana, who has a tight race for county attorney, who has a tight race on the Corporation Commission, whether it will go majority Democrat or Republican, a state that appears to have put in a Democratic county board of supervisors. We'll see how all these races shake out. Thank you for joining us, and stay tuned to AZ Central for more. Good afternoon.